What really happened to Gianluca Ginoble at just 30 years old that left millions of fans around the world heartbroken? How could someone so young, so talented, so full of life be carrying a tragedy that few truly understand? Stay with me, because this is a story that will pull you in, touch your soul, and leave you thinking about the meaning of fame, love, and loss in ways you never imagined. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive deep into the untold stories of the world's most beloved stars. Not just the glamour, not just the success, but the raw humanity behind their journeys. If you've been with us before, you know exactly what to expect. Truth, emotion, and connection. So let's dive right in. Gianluca Ginoble. For many, his name is synonymous with elegance, charm, and an unforgettable voice. Known as one of the three incredible tenors of Il Volo, Gianluca has been captivating audiences worldwide since he was a teenager. With his warm baritone, his captivating smile, and his old soul maturity, he quickly became a fan favorite. People compared him to the greats, Andrea Bocelli, Luciano Pavarotti, but he also carried something uniquely his own. But here's the thing most people forget. Behind the lights, behind the applause, Gianluca is a man who has carried burdens that many never see. And as we explore the tragedy of his life at just 30, we uncover truths that are both heartbreaking and deeply human. Let's rewind for a moment. Gianluca was born in 1995 in Roseto degli Abruzzi, Italy, a small coastal town full of beauty, tradition, and family values. He grew up in a loving family, surrounded by the warmth of his parents and the embrace of his community. From the very start, music was his escape, his passion, his gift. At just 14 years old, he shot to fame when Il Volo was formed after winning the Italian talent show Ti Locio una canzone. Suddenly, Gianluca and his bandmates, Piero Barone and Ignacio Bachetto, were thrust onto the world stage. Imagine that for a second. At an age when most kids are worried about homework, friendships, and maybe their first crush, Gianluca was traveling the world, performing in front of thousands, and becoming a global sensation. Sounds like a dream, right? But here's the heartbreaking part. Fame at that age is not easy. While his peers enjoyed normal teenage years, Gianluca's childhood ended the moment the spotlight hit. No anonymity, no privacy, no space to make mistakes. Every smile, every word, every performance was dissected by millions of fans and critics alike. And this is where the tragedy begins to unfold. Because while Gianluca shined on stage, inside he was often battling feelings of isolation and pressure. Think about it. How would you feel if at just 15, the world expected you to act like an adult, sing like a legend, and live like a star? It's a dream, yes, but also a heavy burden. Yet Gianluca persevered. His natural charisma and humility made him adored by fans across the globe. His voice, rich and emotional, brought tears to listeners. He seemed unstoppable. But as the years went on, the cracks in the armor began to show. And this is where I want to bring you into the story. Let me ask you, have you ever looked at someone who seems to have it all, talent, fame, beauty, success, and wondered if they were truly happy? Gianluca's story forces us to confront that exact question. At just 30, Gianluca carries the weight of a career that has demanded everything from him. His time, his energy, his freedom, and even pieces of his heart. And while millions cheer for him on stage, when the lights go down, he faces struggles that most people never see. In interviews, he's admitted to the loneliness that comes with fame. The endless hotels, the constant travel, the distance from home. While fans see the glamour, the reality is nights spent far from family, far from normalcy, far from the simple joys of life. And though Gianluca is deeply grateful for his career, those quiet moments of solitude remind us that fame always has a price. And then there's the pressure. Il Volo's success has been massive. Chart-topping albums, world tours, collaborations with legends. But behind that success is relentless work. Hours of rehearsal, constant travel, endless demands. Gianluca has openly spoken about the toll it takes, mentally, physically, emotionally. At times, he's hinted at burnout, exhaustion, and the struggle to keep going. But perhaps the most heartbreaking element of Gianluca's tragedy at 30 lies in his personal life. Fans love him, admire him, dream about him. But in his own words, he has often struggled to find balance between love and fame. Relationships strained, moments lost, opportunities missed, all because of the life he was thrust into at such a young age. And yet, here's the most powerful part of the story. Gianluca keeps giving. He keeps singing. He keeps sharing his soul with the world through music. Even when it hurts, even when it costs him, he shows up for his fans. So, as we begin this journey into Gianluca's heartbreaking tragedy, at just 30, I want you to think about this. What does it mean to truly live? Is it about success, or is it about happiness? Is it about applause, or is it about peace? Because Gianluca Ginoble's life at 30 forces us to ask those questions. And as we move deeper into this story, we'll uncover not just the pain, but also the resilience, the humanity, and the hope that makes his journey unforgettable. Stay with me, because this is only the beginning. So here we are, stepping deeper into the life of Gianluca Ginoble, a man adored by millions, celebrated across continents, yet quietly facing struggles that most will never see. At 30 years old, many would imagine that Gianluca is living the dream: wealth, fame, success, and recognition. But as we peel back the layers of his story, what we find is a much more fragile truth. Let's start with something simple yet powerful: the illusion of perfection. Gianluca Ginoble is often seen as the romantic of Il Volo. With his soulful eyes, classic style, and smooth baritone voice, he carries an aura of timeless charm. Fans see the elegance, the poise, the calmness he projects. But what they don't see is the constant effort it takes to maintain that image. To always smile, to always be graceful, to always be Gianluca the star, even on days when he feels like Gianluca the human, Gianluca the tired, Gianluca the vulnerable. And this is something many celebrities wrestle with: the pressure of the mask. You and I, we can have bad days. We can be quiet. We can retreat. We can even break down. But for Gianluca, every time he steps into public, he has to be perfect. Imagine that weight. Imagine never being allowed to simply be. It's one of the first tragedies of fame. You lose the right to your own humanity. And then there's the cost of time. Gianluca has spent more than half his life on stage, traveling from city to city, country to country. For fans, it's thrilling. Concerts in New York, Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. But for him, it means endless airports, sleepless nights, and very little time to just breathe. The world is his stage, but sometimes the world can feel like a cage. And here's where I want you to pause and reflect. How would you feel if at 30 years old, you realized you've never truly had a normal life? No quiet weekends with friends, no lazy afternoons without responsibility, no freedom to simply disappear. Gianluca has often spoken in interviews about craving normalcy, about wanting the simple life moments that many take for granted. That longing itself is heartbreaking, because it shows us that even in the middle of worldwide success, something can still feel missing. But perhaps the most painful part of Gianluca's story at 30 comes from his relationships. For years, fans have speculated about his love life. Rumors, gossip, photos, interviews, the world has always been fascinated by who Gianluca loves. And while he has shared glimpses of his relationships, he has also spoken about how difficult it is to maintain love when your life is always on the move. Imagine falling in love but never having the time to nurture it. Imagine wanting to build a home, a family, but always being pulled away by tours, schedules, and commitments. And here's the quiet truth. Gianluca, despite being adored by millions, has often felt alone. That's the paradox of fame. You can be surrounded by screaming fans, yet feel the most isolated you've ever been. I want you to think about that for a second. How many of us have believed that if we were rich, famous, adored, all our problems would disappear? Gianluca's life proves otherwise. Fame doesn't erase loneliness. In fact, sometimes it makes it louder. And let's not forget the expectations. Gianluca, Piero, and Ignazio aren't just singers. They're ambassadors of Italian culture, voices compared to the greatest legends in opera and classical crossover. That kind of responsibility is enormous. At 30, most people are still figuring out who they are. Gianluca, on the other hand, has spent years trying to live up to impossible standards set by history and by fans who expect nothing less than perfection. He's admitted in the past that the weight of those comparisons sometimes crushes him. The fear of disappointing fans, of not being enough, of failing to live up to his own potential. And while he continues to rise to the occasion, the emotional toll is real. And this is where tragedy takes a deeper shape, because Gianluca's story at 30 is not about one big event, but about the accumulation of sacrifices, the small pieces of his life that fame has taken from him. The birthdays missed, the relationships lost, the quiet nights he never got to have. It's a tragedy not because of scandal or disaster, but because of the silent, invisible costs that fame demands. But here's what makes Gianluca's journey so powerful. Despite the weight, despite the sacrifices, he continues to give his heart to music. He continues to stand on stage and pour out his soul through every note. And that is what makes him extraordinary. Because in the face of personal tragedy, he chooses to give, to inspire, to heal others through his voice. And that brings us to another heartbreaking layer, Gianluca's empathy. Unlike many stars who become hardened by fame, Gianluca has always remained sensitive, emotional, deeply connected to his fans. He reads their letters, he feels their love, he carries their stories with him. But being that open, that empathetic, also means he carries their pain. He has admitted before that he feels the responsibility of being a role model, of being a source of comfort. And that responsibility, while beautiful, is also heavy. Now let me ask you, what's heavier, carrying your own pain or carrying the pain of millions who look to you for strength? Gianluca has been doing both for more than a decade. At 30, when most people are still carving out their paths, Gianluca has already lived a life full of triumph and tragedy. And yet, the world still expects more from him. More music, more tours, more perfection. But at what cost? This is why the tragedy of Gianluca Ginoble at 30 is so striking. Because it isn't just about fame or love or pressure. It's about the fragile truth that even those who seem to have everything are often silently struggling. And Gianluca, despite his smile, despite his charm, is no exception. But before you think this story is only about sadness, remember this: Gianluca's tragedy is also his triumph. Because even in the face of these challenges, he continues to shine. His voice continues to move people to tears. His humility continues to inspire. His resilience continues to prove that sometimes the most beautiful music is born from the deepest pain. So let me ask you, when you listen to Gianluca sing, do you just hear the notes or do you hear the story behind them? Because once you know what he's carried, every song becomes something more. It becomes not just a performance, but a piece of his soul. And as we move into the final part of this story, we'll explore how Gianluca's tragedy is shaping his future, the choices he faces, the legacy he's building, and the question we're all left with: can a man who gives so much to the world ever find peace for himself? Stay with me, because this final chapter will reveal the most heartbreaking and yet the most inspiring truth of all. When we left off, we uncovered the hidden struggles of Gianluca Ginoble, the loneliness behind the fame, the relentless expectations, the quiet battles with identity and love. Now let's dive into the most heartbreaking part of his story, the way those struggles shape not only his present, but also his future. At 30 years old, Gianluca stands at a crossroads. For some, 30 is still the beginning, a time to explore, to experiment, to make mistakes. But for Gianluca, 30 feels like the middle of a lifetime already lived. And that, my friends, is where the tragedy deepens. Because the price of starting young is that by the time most people are just entering adulthood, you've already burned through decades of yourself. Think about this. Gianluca was barely a teenager when Il Volo was formed. At an age when most kids were discovering who they wanted to be, he was already being told who he was. He was the baritone, the romantic, the charming young star. That label followed him everywhere. But here's the question. Did Gianluca ever get to decide who he truly is? Or was his identity shaped for him before he had the chance to explore it himself? This kind of pressure builds a quiet storm inside. Imagine living a life where every choice is filtered through the lens of your career, your image, your obligations. Do you date this person? Do you post that photo? Do you speak your mind or hold back for the sake of the brand? Gianluca has had to measure every step, every word, every move, not as Gianluca the man, but as Gianluca the star. And when you live that way for long enough, you start to lose sight of the person behind the mask. Now let's talk about health. Fans see the glamour, the glow, the flawless performances. But behind the curtain, Gianluca has faced his share of struggles. The strain of constant travel, the toll of sleepless nights, the impact of performing under pressure for years on end. It takes a physical toll that no one can see from the outside. Even his mental health has been a quiet battlefield. Gianluca has hinted at times about his need for grounding, his search for balance, his longing for peace of mind. And isn't that heartbreaking? To know that someone who gives so much joy to others is often wrestling with his own inner storms. But here's where the story turns even more tragic. Gianluca, for all his fame, still feels the weight of not being fully understood. To millions, he's the voice of romance, the Italian dream. But who is he beyond that? Who listens when Gianluca himself needs a shoulder to lean on? Who sees the man when the stage lights turn off? And here's something I want you to imagine. Picture Gianluca after a sold-out concert in front of thousands stepping off stage. The cheers fade, the lights dim, the curtain falls. Suddenly, it's quiet. The adrenaline drains away. He walks into a hotel room alone. No crowd, no music, no distraction, just silence. That silence, my friends, can be deafening. And it's in those moments that the tragedy of his life comes into focus. The tragedy isn't in failure or scandal. It's in the emptiness that fame cannot fill. It's in the sacrifices nobody claps for. It's in the pain that even applause cannot drown out. But let's not forget, Gianluca isn't just a man weighed down by tragedy. He's also a fighter. That's what makes his story so captivating. Despite the loneliness, despite the expectations, despite the inner storms, he continues to rise. He continues to give his heart to music, to fans, to the world. That resilience is his quiet victory. And here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Why does he keep going? Why does he keep giving when it costs him so much? The answer lies in his love for music. For Gianluca, music is not just a career. It's a lifeline. It's therapy. It's the one place where he can be both vulnerable and strong at the same time. On stage, he doesn't have to hide behind a mask. He pours out his soul in every note, and in doing so, he finds a release. That's why fans connect with him so deeply, because when Gianluca sings, you're not just hearing a voice, you're hearing his truth. And that truth is why, even in tragedy, Gianluca remains unforgettable. Now, let's talk about the future. At 30, Gianluca stands on the edge of what could be his most defining years. He has choices to make. Will he continue to live only for the stage, or will he step back and carve out space for his own happiness? Will he keep sacrificing himself for the sake of fans, or will he finally put himself first? These are questions that will shape the rest of his life. And here's the heartbreaking part. No matter what he chooses, something will be lost. If he chooses fame, he risks losing himself. If he chooses himself, he risks letting down millions. That's the tragedy of Gianluca Ginoble at 30. To the world, he's living the dream. But inside, he's trapped between two worlds, the man he wants to be and the star he is expected to be. And every day, he walks that tightrope, never fully free to fall on either side. But let me tell you something, there's also beauty in this tragedy, because it shows us that Gianluca is human, that behind the perfection, behind the image, there is a man who feels, who struggles, who hurts just like us. And maybe that's why we love him even more, because his story reminds us that even the brightest stars are still made of flesh and bone. So let me ask you one final question. The next time you see Gianluca Ginoble on stage singing with that unforgettable voice, will you just see a star? Or will you see the man behind the voice carrying the weight of sacrifice, pain, and resilience? Because if you do, then you'll understand why his story at 30 is both tragic and inspiring. And maybe, just maybe, that's the true gift Gianluca gives the world. Not just music, but the reminder that it's okay to be human. It's okay to struggle, and it's okay to keep going, even when the world doesn't see the battles you fight. So as we close this story, remember this. Gianluca Ginoble is more than a tragedy. He is proof that beauty can rise from pain, that strength can be born from struggle, and that even in heartbreak, there is hope. And that, my friends, is why at 30, Gianluca Ginoble's story touches us so deeply.